This channel is sponsored by the Army Painter.
Most Space Marine detachments map neatly onto one chapter or another, and the Anvil Siege Force is the most Imperial Fist flavored of the bunch, provided you're not going for Emperor's Shield anyway. Focusing on defense, long-range shooting, and more or less standing still, this detachment is one that sells Dorn's characteristic stoicism. Whether or not that translates into something usable on the tabletop is another question entirely. For detachment focuses, codex reviews, and hobby tutorials, subscribe to us here on YouTube. To read more, head to goonhammer.com. Link in the description. Detachment Rule: Shield of the Imperium. Ranged weapons on Adeptus Astartes models gain heavy. If a model already had a weapon with this ability and remains stationary, it gets +1 to wound rolls. This is a pretty simple detachment rule and an easy one to build around, though it's got some pretty obvious drawbacks. To take advantage of heavy, your units will need to be standing still, meaning that you won't be grabbing objectives or interacting with the board. Fortunately, a few of the enhancements and stratagems also encourage you to remain stationary, letting you layer a few buffs at a time on your shooting units. Theoretically, this benefits units with indirect fire, but given that those can only ever hit on a 4-up, it doesn't actually do much for them. One interaction to keep in mind is that the bonus to wound from the detachment won't stack with the bonus to wound from Oath of Moment, so you'll want to be mindful with your choice of target when you're going for this. On the whole, this isn't great. Movement is life in 40k, and having an ability that turns off if you have to move to capture an objective isn't ideal. Your big plan here is likely going to be to move for objectives early, then stand on those while using your heavy benefits to protect them. For that reason, this detachment usually wants to go first. Now let's just remain neutral and say these are an unusual bunch of enhancements. Indomitable Fury lets a Gravis character stand up after dying. This is a fun add-on for a solo Gravis captain and will typically be something you want to put on a solo character, making him an annoying mid-table harassment unit. Fleet Commander involves drawing a line between 2 points over 2 turns, doing some mortal wounds on units on the path. It's a lot of setup for not a lot of benefit. Stoic Defender is a 6-up Feel No Pain for the bearer's unit while they're controlling an objective, and they only have their OC if they're battle shocked. You more or less need this if you're playing this to stand out in objectives in the open, and it's great on Terminators. Architect of War gives the bearer's unit ignores cover. This one's good on something like Desolation Marines or Hellblasters, to make sure you're getting the most out of the ranged weapons. The stratagems mostly focus on digging onto objectives or unleashing extra firepower. They're not generally good enough to make this detachment worth looking at seriously, but there's still some solid offensive buffs here. Armor of Contempt is an old standby, reducing the AP of incoming attacks by 1 for a single activation. It's a smidge better in melee as you're seldom being hit by 2 different enemy units in the same phase that require this stratagem. It'll still have a lot of use against something like Knights, where you'll often have to face AP1 or AP2 firepower, and you may not have that many units shooting at you either. Rigid Discipline lets a unit fall back at the end of the fight phase, but only into your deployment zone or onto an objective. This is a solid way to disengage when you don't want to be in a fight, and it combos well with that heavy ability to ensure that you're not in combat, so you can get your full shooting without having to fall back. Not One Backward Step doubles a unit's OC, but they have to remain stationary. It's useful if you're outnumbered on an objective and need to stay put while shooting. No Threat Too Great lets a unit reroll wounds against monster or vehicle units in the shooting phase. It's good for punching up with Hellblasters, Centurions, and Heavy Intercessors. Battle Drill Recall is solid, giving a unit sustained hits 1 and scoring critical hits on 5s if they remain stationary. Combine this with Heavy and Oath of Moment to get some eye-watering damage output. Hail of Vengeance lets a unit shoot back after losing a model. This isn't Overwatch, and since you generally aren't moving on an opponent's turn, that means the heavy rule will apply to your shots, giving you +1 to hit when you use this. That's pretty damn good, and one of the rare points of synergy for this detachment. This detachment favors a gunline approach, plopping down bricks of infantry and vehicles into positions where they'll have good firing lanes. That means deployment will be extremely important for this army, as it won't have the maneuverability to get those angles while still taking advantage of the detachment rule. That'll open you up to getting shot early though, so sticking to cover will be necessary to keep your units intact. There might be some play in holding some units back, then bring them in with rapid ingress into positions where they'll have some shooting, so when it does come around to your turn, they can remain stationary in an advantageous position. That does potentially mean you'll be putting yourself into a place where you can get shot by enemy units though. The units that are going to sing here are ones that already have heavy and put up a fair amount of shooting, namely Hellblasters, Gladiators, and Repulsor Executioners. Hellblasters with an Architect of War character will be ignoring cover, making them effectively AP-4. Stack that with the Lieutenant for lethal hits and the Battle Drill Recall stratagem, and you're putting out a frankly upsetting amount of plasma fire. The problem is, your dudes are still just T4 bodies with 3-up saves, and they'll have to stand still to take full advantage of this. That opens them up to being stuck out of position at best, or massacred at worst. The threat of shooting back with Hail of Vengeance could deter that somewhat, and a smart player will either try to bait it out with a unit that doesn't matter much, or avoid shooting your Hellblaster or Eradicator brick altogether, unless they can wipe them out in one activation. Note that not one backward step requires you to remain stationary, but doesn't preclude a unit from making a charge, meaning you could absolutely use it to flip an objective, score it in your command phase, then charge someplace else if there's something in range. There's nothing here to boost those combat units though, so if you do try this trick, it'll have to be with something fairly self-sufficient, like Aggressors or Blade Guard. Now let's go over the strengths and weaknesses. Shooting. Conditional +1 to hit and occasional +1 to wound are solid shooting buffs, and the enhancements and stratagems can enhance your shooting further. There's a lot of potential offensive output that you can put to work here. Objective play. Boosts to OC and some stratagems help your dudes pile onto objectives and outscore your opponent. Offensive stratagems. This set of stratagems is a solid mix of retaliatory fire, boosted shooting, and maneuvering, with some unique effects not seen in other detachments. No, unfortunately, this detachment sucks at moving. The detachment rule and stratagems largely depend on your guys staying put, meaning that you're not moving around the table much. That's brutal since it means you'll have to put in a lot of work to play around the drawback to your +1 to hit bonus. Melee. None of the enhancements or stratagems here support any kind of melee punch. Heavy weapons. While there are some great units with heavy weapons like Hellblasters and tanks, you generally want them moving to keep them alive and get them into position. While we could have saved some time by just saying, "This one sucks, move on," we still wanted to give this detachment its due and see if there was something we missed. There's certainly a few scary shooting combos here, at least on paper. That pumped up Hellblaster stack can do some serious damage in the right conditions, but to make anything work, you'll need command points, stationary units, and enemies who, for whatever reason, don't want to shoot or charge your stationary, exposed infantry. You'll probably want to make sure that Mercury's in retrograde while you're at it. The setup required to make this detachment work likely isn't worth it, and it probably won't work unless your opponent's asleep at the wheel. If you want to read more about this detachment and check out a sample list, head over to goonhammer.com. Now why don't you Imperial fist that subscribe button and don't remain stationary, run and support us on Patreon, where you can get access to bonus podcasts, extra features and tabletop battles, and more. I've been Sedentary McLifestyle, and I've really got to stretch my legs. Thanks for watching.